Hi, my name is Sam Salerno and I'm a communications student in the Intercultural Communications course at Grand Canyon University. This course is also called Communication 263 and this is with Professor Ray Thompson. At the beginning of this course we were asked to choose a culture to study, and this video project is kind of the culmination of what I've learned. So this video is split into 6 parts, all going over and focusing on the culture I chose, which I will explain in a second. The first part is the introduction and preview. I will give a brief overview of the culture I chose, why I chose it, and a little bit of a history to this particular culture. 2, communication cultural challenges and communication cultural values. Switch all that. Cultural communication values and challenges. In this section, I will be focusing on how culture shapes a person's language, how their values shape their language, and some of the difficulties that can arise when communicating with this particular culture. Number 3 ties directly into part 2, which will be focusing on language and culture, and I'll talk a little bit about the language of this culture. Part 4, I will give a little bit of a nonverbal training guide to help anyone that wants to interact with this culture, which I guarantee you do almost every day. And 5, conflict styles and management, which is exactly what it sounds like. And finally 6, my conclusion and summary. So 6 pieces, let's get started. At the beginning of this course, we were asked to choose a culture that we'd be studying through the rest of our course time. I chose the Latino culture, and this is primarily because I live in California, which has a humongous Latino population. In fact, when I was in elementary school, middle school, and high school, I was actually considered a minority, simply because the Latino population in Monterey specifically is so big. So that's the reason I chose this culture, so I could better understand it. A majority of my friends are actually Hispanic, and this was actually a really fun course for me to take because it helps me better understand them. So we have to start with a little bit of history. In 1602, the Spanish claimed California for itself. It wasn't called California, but Spanish government claimed the whole western coast of what is now the United States. They owned this for about 100 years before actually starting to bring culture over. And that was in the form of missions. Father Junipero Serra planted missions up and down the United States coast, the western coast. And these missions had the primary goal of converting Native Americans to Catholicism, and in the process teaching them Spanish culture, which was a scary thing because it destroyed a lot of Native American culture, and now we have this kind of conglomerate version. So in 1822, however, this was 1720, so almost 100 years later, the Mexican people revolted. They wanted independence. They wanted freedom from Spain. So they revolted and they got their independence. They continued to cultivate the land, and they really maintained a lot of the Spanish origin that had come over from Spain. But this didn't last long because in 1846, the U.S., during the Mexican-American War, U.S. Navy Commodore John Drake Sloat landed in Monterey, which is the city I live in. He landed in Monterey and claimed California for the United States. But this didn't really do anything. The land remained part of Mexico, but was kind of in this limbo state. And during this time, a lot of land-hungry, greedy men came and they tricked the Mexican landowners out of their land. They would put these huge taxes on houses and do all these crazy things, and the only thing that the landowners could do would be to surrender their land, and they actually became the workforce on their own property. So that was in 1846. In 1848, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo was signed. And what this treaty did was it signed over huge portions of land signed over modern California, Arizona, Nevada, and other western states, handed it over to the United States, so it became officially part of the U.S. In 1850, right during the height of the gold rush, the U.S. Senate voted and they brought California in as an official state, And from then on out, the cultural divide between Anglo-Americans and Mexican-Americans, Hispanics, Latinos continued to grow. It continued to get deeper and deeper. And you wonder, what does all this history have to do with anything? Well, the fact is we're still living in a result of that history. The deepened divide between Anglo-Americans, Mexican-Americans, Hispanics, Latinos. If you turn the news on, you'll see immigration reform. You'll see Trump claiming to want to build a wall. There's just a lot of stuff going on that is remnants of this history. So that's why I chose this culture for my project, because not only did I want to understand it more, but I wanted to be able to communicate in a way that will better the people in that culture. This leads us to part number 2, which is cultural communication values and intercultural communication challenges. This is a huge topic, but luckily, people smarter than myself have been studying this Latino culture for the last 25, 30 years. And this group is called the Loretta Marketing Group, and they've been conducting studies on the core values of Latinos. And here's what they found. The core values of Latino culture are self-belief, risk-taking, independence, family, hard work ethic, deep pride in heritage, and ambition. And with many Latino friends and colleagues, I can personally say that this list is pretty dang accurate. Self-belief, we'll talk about that first. Self-belief, the Latino culture believes in its ability to pull itself up by the bootstraps and press on. It's evident through their history and in their communication style. Their communication style is filled with confidence. If you really dig deep down, you will find that there is an indwelling sense of confidence in the Latino culture. Risk-taking. Latinos are more prone to take risks, and this is simply because they want the best thing. If you look at the border, Latinos are willing to cross the border and endure harsh conditions in order for what they believe to be a better future on the other side of the Mexican-American border. And this is even more amplified when you take into effect the family welfare, the welfare of their family. Independence, it goes without saying. The family unit is the core unit of Latino culture. Much pride is taken in Latino families, and you're typically known by your family name before you're even known personally. Hard work ethic, again, this is directly tied to confidence and independence. The deep pride in heritage, ambition, and these are the core values. These are the core values of Mexican Americans and Latinos in general. And these core values also tie into the communication challenges. So we're going to jump into that. That was part 2. Now we're into part 3, which is language. The primary language of Latino culture is Spanish. Language itself poses one of the most difficult intercultural communication challenges ever. If you can't communicate with somebody, then it's difficult to get to know them. And there are many dialects of Spanish, but for the most part, it is a very fast, very animated language that becomes difficult to pick up with people that speak it quickly, or people that are very animated or energetic in it. And I'm really not sure how it's done in other states, but I know, again, from personal experience as a Californian, in high school, I had to take 3 years of Spanish. It was a mandatory requirement. And even though I had to take it, I unfortunately can't speak it very well. I can understand it actually really well. So if you're speaking to me in Spanish, I can pick it up, but it's difficult for me to give a response. So if one wants to overcome the Latino cultural barrier, then you absolutely, positively have to learn Spanish. It is similar to French. It is similar to Italian. It has its roots in classic Latin and Arabic. Many of the words that are used throughout French, Spanish, Italian, and English are similar to one another. If, for example, we take the word bad, in Spanish, that word is mal. In French, that word is mal. In Italian, it's male. And in Portuguese, it's mal. Similarities like this make learning languages such as Spanish a bit easier because there's so much they kind of continue into each other, these different languages, but it's still kind of tricky. So the number one cultural communication challenge is learning the language that most Latinos speak, which is Spanish. Number 4, nonverbal communication training guide. One of our assignments in this class was to put together a nonverbal communication training guide specifically for the culture we had chosen. So I put together a communication training guide for the Latino culture, and this was a way for me to better understand how I communicate with my friends and colleagues, and to better understand how they communicate with me. So we're going to go over 5 different parts of the nonverbal communication. So number 1, eye contact. Eye contact in Hispanic culture is super important, but that doesn't mean you just go and you stare people in the eyes. In the United States, we value eye contact. You make eye contact when you shake hands. You make eye contact with strangers when you meet them. You make eye contact with those you respect. If you don't make eye contact, then it's considered disrespectful. However, in Latino culture, you have to understand that Latino culture places a very high respect in eye contact. As a child, you were not supposed to look your parents or your grandparents in the eye. And this wasn't out of fear, this was out of respect. Until the grandparent invited you to look, or until you were encouraged and kind of in a warmer presence around your grandparents or your family, you were not supposed to make eye contact. If I was to meet my grandfather, for example, and I was in the Latino culture, it would dictate that out of respect, I would not make eye contact with him until he invited me to do so. And that's not a verbal invite. It's just something that you kind of feel it's okay to make eye contact with them now. With coworkers and friends, totally fine. Eye contact is great. But when you want to show respect, you usually divert your eyes. So number 2, kinesics. Latino culture is a very animated culture. Hand gestures, body movement, these are signs and indicators of mood. If you have if you have rapid gestures, then you're typically talking with somebody that is excited or happy, or something that gets them going, it gives them energy. Likewise, if you are talking to someone that is moving slower, or someone that is speaking slower, moving slower, then you're talking with somebody that is most likely going through a bout of sadness or sorrow. So even though sometimes the movements of Hispanic people may seem a little over the top, you have to realize that they're just the way people communicate, and most of the time they're adding emphasis to the communication. So some quick tips when it comes to nonverbal communication training. Number 1, don't stand with your hands on your hips. It's a sign of aggression in Hispanic culture. Don't make the OK symbol. This symbol means like the number 0, or it can mean something really bad that I will not say on camera. And then finally, I guess it's just don't be afraid of being animated with your own hand gestures. It's something I struggle with. I'm not a very animated person. So don't be afraid of being animated in your own gestures during conversation. This is for kinesics. Number 3, proxemics. This has to do with your personal space. Latino culture has a much smaller personal space bubble than Anglo-Americans, and it's actually not uncommon to see someone trying to regain their personal space when in conversation with a Hispanic, only to have the Hispanic step forward. So if I was to take a step back saying, well, you're in my space, he or she would probably come forward to just reconnect. And proximity is it's not awkward. Instead, it is an indicator of attention, focus, and interest, really. So similarly, greetings in Latino culture are reflective of this idea of proxemics. A handshake is usually given softly and in close proximity. It's not a long, drawn-out handshake. It's usually much closer to the body. It's inviting. It's warming when you're close. That's the first. The second way that people greet each other, friends and family, they can be seen kissing each other on the cheek. and this is called a besos, and it's just a family familiar way of greeting another person. So some quick tips for proxemics: be gentle when shaking hands. Don't be super firm when you're shaking hands. And men, wait for the woman to extend her hand to you. Do not be the first one to extend your hand. It's considered rude. And second is just get comfortable with people invading your personal bubble. And be prepared for hugs, especially from moms and grandmas. Number 4, haptics, or physical touch. This is very similar to proxemics in the whole way that greeting plays a role in the Latino culture. Handshakes, hugs, kissing on cheeks, holding hands, all of these fall under that same field of haptics and proxemics. The Latino culture is a very touchy-feely culture. There are some things you need to be aware of, though, so keep these quick tips in mind. 1, either shake hands with someone or offer a slight bow to show respect, particularly with strangers. 2, have a welcoming demeanor when you greet someone. 3, offer a bow to a woman or wait for her to extend her hand. And 4, don't pull away from a hug or kiss on the cheek. That's considered rude. And again, men, don't hug a woman on first meeting unless she initiates it. All right, number 5, paralinguistics. This is everything to do with the tone of your voice and how you deliver your message vocally. So the tone of your voice is very important in any culture, but in a Hispanic culture, inflection, the use of speed, silence, volume, all of these play a huge role in communication. So in Mexican culture, Latino culture, being soft-spoken is preferred, being loud is considered aggressive and violent. So some quick tips for this: be soft-spoken, especially when meeting someone. Use silence as a way to indicate you are contemplating what was just said. And to show engagement, match the energy level of the person you are talking with. Avoid being loud, because that signals aggression, and avoid using sarcasm, as it's, for Anglo-Americans to Hispanics, it is actually difficult to convey that in Spanish. All right, and the final part, number 6, chronemics. This is the use of time in communication, nonverbal communication. Hispanic culture has a very different view on time than Americans do. For Americans, everything is by the clock. There's the saying that time is money. We obsessively track our time. We get paid by the hour, so we are more concerned with a future thing, with something that is in the future. Hispanics, however, they're the opposite. They are a very present-focused culture. And because they are present-focused, their conversations are more likely to be interrupted, and that's not a bad thing in culture. And people, in general, people always come first. So don't be surprised when a conversation gets interrupted for someone to go meet their family or to be with someone. It's just people come first. Serving people comes first. So some quick tips: don't be surprised if a deadline becomes squishy, and also if you're planning on meeting with somebody, then don't be upset if a few minutes late. I know I value timeliness, so for me this is probably the most difficult one when it comes to nonverbal communication. But if someone is late to a gathering, then you just have to understand that there's a different value for time with the Hispanic culture. All right, this takes us to part 6, I believe, and that is conflict styles in management. The best way to illustrate this particular thing that I've learned is to focus on a campaign speech that Donald Trump made in 2015. And in this speech, Trump labeled Mexicans as rapists, job stealers, and criminals. And this was a huge, broad stereotype that painted almost every Hispanic in the United States as a rapist, as a criminal, or someone that's here to steal jobs. And unfortunately, this rhetoric led to just ugly displays of violence between Trump supporters and Hispanics. Many good Latino people, they stood up, and though they were branded as criminals and job thieves, drug runners, and worse, they stood up and they sought to educate Hispanics. They sought to educate the public as to why this specific speech that Donald Trump used was so damaging. And the response of Latino culture to this kind of conflict is, it goes right back to the core values. With self-belief, with risk-taking, with ambition, and family comes first, and their hard work ethic and a deep pride and heritage, this kind of angry rhetoric led to a sense of unity, which it's weird to say that, but at the same time, it's understandable because Latinos formed groups that would, again, they'd educate the public and other Latinos. And then there were also the other side of the spectrum where a number of Latinos, specifically in California, they became violent and they reacted to these protests by damaging property and harassing people, which unfortunately played into the stereotype that they were trying to fight against. But the point of all this is Latino culture deals with conflict by standing up to face the challenge. They don't take challenge sitting backwards. The confidence and pride they feel inspires them to take risks and to be bold and to stand for what they believe is right. And there's always a few rotten apples in the bunch, but for the most part, the Hispanic culture, again, those core values, they really drive into how Hispanics seek the best for everybody. They want the best for everyone, and that is how they deal with conflict. Although these 7 weeks have been a bit of a roller coaster in this class, the material I learned while studying the Latino culture has been invaluable to me, not just as a Californian, but as a human being. It has opened my eyes to see that we are all different, but we're all living together, and we should strive to understand one another and seek harmony and peace. I know that I will be able to take what I have learned in this class and use it in my interactions with my Latino neighbors, friends, and coworkers to become a better person and a better communicator. So that is it. That is my final project. Thank you, Professor Thompson, for teaching this class and for the work that you have done and all the difficulty you've had to endure over the last couple of weeks. Know that I am super appreciative of all that you've done, and I value you and your time very much. So thank you. Once again, my name is Sam Salerno. This is my intercultural communications final project, and thank you so much.